If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands.
Is Elizabeth Dunn, a prof at the University of British Columbia. And she is in the field of social psychology. And she is one of those who have studied the concept of happiness for a number of years. And her doctorate was actually quite an award-winning presentation in that she found out that when people are putting on the charm and be pleasant to other people, even though they don't exactly mean it, they derive some very significant well-being from it. I don't know whether I'm getting it right or not. So that was quite an interesting PhD presentation that she had. And that apparently there is some very significant real-life application from that study in that well, the real-life application apparently is that if you have been married for a long time and you feel a little bit stale, then you can rekindle the spark by pretending that you are strangers to each other. What Liz is very interested in is a kind of a cross-disciplinary research on happiness, and she strongly believes that this type of study, this type of research would have significant implications for public policies, and that she thinks the time is right now to have a policy of happiness. So, Elizabeth Dunn.
I've never given a talk with a mic in my hand before. It's kind of fun. Okay. Well, first off, I'd just like to thank Victor for organizing this event and all of you for coming out tonight. So the research that I'll be describing tonight really stems from the insight evoked in this cartoon. Here we see this dog complaining, "I've got the bowl, the bone, the big yard. I know I should be happy." Indeed, consistent with this dog's lament, in our own recent research, we've found that money doesn't seem to deliver the degree of happiness that most people would expect. So why is this? Why is it that money fails to deliver as much happiness as we might anticipate? Well, one of the most intriguing answers to this question was offered by economist Robert Frank. In an article brilliantly entitled "How Not to Buy Happiness," Frank suggests that people do not spend their extra money in ways that yield significant and lasting increases in measured satisfaction. In other words, people don't spend their money right. So, this begs the question, how could we spend our money better in order to increase our own happiness? Well, in contemplating this question, we can turn to the wisdom of the Dalai Lama, who suggested that wise people want happiness. How to do this? By cultivating compassion, by cultivating altruism. When they care for others, they themselves are the first to benefit, the first to get maximum happiness. So this suggests then that if we use our financial resources to benefit other people, we ourselves may experience increased happiness. Now, this idea, of course, is grounded in ancient wisdom, but it's rarely been subjected to scientific scrutiny. In one of the first experimental tests of this idea, then, we went up to students on the UBC campus and handed them a $5 or a $20 bill. Now, we gave this money to them in the morning and asked them to spend it by 5 p.m. that day. Depending on the flip of a coin, we assigned them to either spend the money on themselves or on somebody else. Now, we asked them to report their happiness both in the morning before they received this windfall, as well as in the evening after they had spent it. So what did UBC students do with this extra bit of cash in their hand? Well, when we said, hey, spend this money on yourself, they did things like buying earrings, eyeshadow, and food or drink for themselves. By contrast, when we told them to spend the money on someone else, they did things like buying toys for younger siblings, making donations to charity, as well as buying food or drink for friends. So the question is, which type of spending will leave people happier at the end of the day? Well, consistent with the wisdom of the Dalai Lama and our own hypothesis, we found that people were significantly happier at the end of the day if we had instructed them to spend the money on somebody else. Interestingly, we found exactly the same effect regardless of whether we gave people $5 or gave them $20, suggesting that reallocating the way you spend as little as $5 a day could make a difference for your happiness. Now, I don't think these results would be very surprising to the Dalai Lama, but we thought perhaps these results would be counterintuitive to most people. So to find out, we went up to a new group of UBC students and we just asked them to imagine being in that study I just told you about. We said, you know, would you be happier if we gave you $5 or gave you $20? And what about if we asked you to spend the money on yourself or someone else? Well, not surprisingly, UBC students told us they would be happier if we gave them $20 than if we gave them $5. But more interestingly, they also told us they would be happier if we let them spend the money on themselves rather than on someone else. So this suggests then that spending money on other people, using our financial resources in generous ways, may represent a kind of overlooked route to well-being. Of course, you might be thinking, okay, this is the UBC campus, maybe this is something about UBC students, would this generalize to Vancouver, to Canada, to the rest of the world? Well, we thought this was an important question, and we were particularly interested in whether we would see similar kinds of effects emerge, similar benefits as a result of financial generosity in poorer countries where people have a lot less disposable income. So to tackle this question, we asked students in both Canada and Uganda to tell us about a time when they had spent $20, or its equivalent 10,000 Ugandan shillings. We asked them to vividly recall the spending experience, and again, we asked half of them to tell us about a time they'd spent money on themselves. We asked the other half to tell us about a time they'd spent money on somebody else. Now, the idea here is that if spending money on other people produces lasting emotional benefits, then when you really vividly reflect on this experience, we would expect you to be happier thinking about a time you spent money on somebody else versus on yourself. Of course, the real question here is, would we get this effect in Uganda as well as in Canada? So before I tell you what we found, let me just give you a little sampling of the kinds of spending experiences that people told us about. So when we said, tell us about a time you spent money on yourself, in Uganda, one person wrote, I spent 9,500 shillings on the trouser. It is so far my biggest expenditure this year. The trouser had a matching color with a shirt I had already. That is why I spent such an amount on it. Now, in contrast, we see a somewhat more casual attitude towards spending in Canada, with one participant writing, I was at the mall just looking around and I bought 2 bottles of nail polish. We see similar sorts of differences emerge when we look at the spending experiences where we ask people to describe a time they spent on someone else. So in Uganda, one person wrote, last month I gave money to a friend of approximately 12,000 shillings to buy medication for his aching ulcers. I voluntarily bought the drugs for him. By contrast, in Canada, we see someone saying, I spent $20 for 2 dozen red roses from Costco for my mother's birthday on December 4th. Also very nice. Now, I have to be honest with you. When I read through these spending descriptions while I was in Uganda, I thought to myself, there is no way we are replicating this effect here in Uganda. These spending descriptions are wildly different than the kinds of things people were writing about in Canada. But to my own surprise, we found exactly the same effect in Uganda and Canada, whereby people felt happier when they reflected on a time when they spent money on somebody else rather than on themselves. Now, of course, here we're looking at just 2 countries. So to broaden our lens, we teamed up with John Helliwell and his amazing student, Chris Barrington-Lee, to take a look at the Gallup World Poll. Using these data, we were able to examine almost 200,000 respondents from 136 countries. Luckily for us, the Gallup World Poll includes questions about participants' happiness, their income, and it also asks them whether they've donated to charity in the past month, providing us with kind of a rough index of financial generosity. So what we can do then is look within each of these 136 countries and see whether donating to charity is related to greater happiness, even controlling for income. So here's a map of our findings. On this map, green represents a positive relationship between donating to charity and happiness. Darker colors of green indicating a stronger relationship. Conversely, red indicates a negative relationship between donating to charity and happiness. What you see here is that the world is pretty green. In other words, in countries around the world, rich and poor alike, we see that donating to charity is associated with greater happiness. So having seen this robust association between happiness and financial generosity, we wondered whether there might be implications for physical health as well. As a first attack on this question, we began by looking at cortisol. Cortisol is often called a stress hormone because it rises in stressful situations, particularly when some negative aspect of the self is revealed. Now, cortisol is kind of always rising and falling, but over time, elevated levels of cortisol can cause wear and tear on the body, and cortisol has been implicated in a number of health problems. Conveniently for us, cortisol can be measured non-invasively in spit. So we wanted to see then whether generous or stingy financial decisions might hold downstream implications for cortisol. To get at this, we had 50 people play what's called the dictator game. In the dictator game, we had a whole bunch of people in the lecture hall. We asked 50 of them to be our dictators. We gave them an envelope filled with 10 loonies, and we said, you can keep all of this money for yourself, or, if you wish, you can share as much of it as you like with another student sitting somewhere else in the classroom to whom you've been randomly paired. All right? So before our dictators made these decisions, we had them spit onto a cotton swab, allowing us to take a baseline measure of cortisol. They then played the dictator game. We asked them how they were feeling, asked about their emotions, and we had them spit several more times. So what we found consistent with our previous findings was that the more money dictators shared, the more of these loonies they took and gave away, the higher their positive emotions after the game, even controlling for how they were feeling prior to the game. Conversely, the more money dictators kept for themselves, the more negative emotion they experienced. In particular, the more money dictators kept for themselves, the more shame they felt. Now, this is important because shame is the emotion that's been most closely tied to the release of cortisol. Indeed, the more shame people felt following this game, the higher their levels of cortisol following the dictator game, controlling for their levels of cortisol prior to the game. So what this suggests then is that generous or stingy financial decisions may hold downstream consequences for biological health-related processes. Now, as well as taking our research under the skin and around the world, we've also become interested in taking it beyond the individual to consider how financial generosity may influence performance in teams and organizations. So in some of our very newest data, we've been studying dodgeball teams in Canada and pharmaceutical sales teams in Belgium. What we do is we go into these teams and we give a few people on the team some money, $20 or 15 euros. Now in some teams we say, what we want you to do is just spend this money on yourself. In other teams we say, okay, we want you to spend this money on your teammates. Remarkably, turns out that just giving people some money to spend on their teammates can actually increase dodgeball victory rates as well as pharmaceutical sales. So this is our newest data. It's not even out yet, but it's some exciting new findings and a hint of where our work is going. All right, so taken together, I would suggest that our research provides some scientific evidence for the Dalai Lama's suggestion that cultivating altruism can provide a route to well-being. Indeed, our work suggests that financial generosity may hold implications for happiness, cortisol, and even victory in dodgeball. So I will go ahead and stop there and thank the incredible people who've really done a lot of the work behind this research.